It was like having this close to your dreams. And then watch them brush past you like a stranger in a crowd.
The untold secrets of legendary Burt Lancaster have finally been revealed. The star who once captivated all of Hollywood has just disclosed his secret romances with famous gay actors of the past, names the world has never known. From the dazzling stage lights to the closed doors behind the scenes, this hidden love story will leave you astonished. Who are the ones who shared intimate, passionate, yet tumultuous moments with him during Hollywood's golden era? Brace yourself, as these revelations will forever change the way you view cinematic legends. When we talk about the golden age of Hollywood, a handful of names immediately rise to the surface. Towering figures who shaped not just the silver screen, but also the culture that orbited around it. Among them, Burt Lancaster stands apart. Born Burton Stephen Lancaster in 1913 in a working-class neighborhood of East Harlem, New York, he seemed an unlikely candidate for stardom. The son of Italian and Irish immigrants, Lancaster grew up in a crowded household where money was always scarce, but dreams were never entirely out of reach. What distinguished young Burt wasn't a love for the stage or an obsession with the movies. He rarely went to the cinema as a child, but rather his extraordinary physicality. He was a natural athlete, tall, broad-shouldered, and agile, with a magnetic presence that seemed to draw people in without him trying. Before Hollywood came calling, Lancaster's first career was in the circus. Alongside a childhood friend, he formed an acrobatic duo known as Lang and Cravat, performing daring trapeze stunts in small traveling shows. The experience not only built his stamina and discipline, but also instilled in him the confidence to take risks, a trait that would later define his career on screen and behind the camera. It was fate, or perhaps sheer coincidence, that led him into acting. An injury forced him to step away from the circus, and a chance audition introduced him to the theater. Soon after, Hollywood discovered him. In 1946, his life changed forever with The Killers, a gritty film noir adapted from Ernest Hemingway's short story. The film didn't just introduce a new actor, it introduced a new kind of leading man. Lancaster was rugged yet sensitive, physically imposing yet capable of conveying deep emotional vulnerability. Audiences were captivated, and overnight, a star was born. What made Lancaster so compelling was his refusal to be boxed into a single archetype. In an era when many leading men relied heavily on their looks or screen presence, he demanded more from himself. He sought complexity in his roles and gravitated toward characters who were flawed, conflicted, or morally ambiguous. Whether he was playing the charismatic conman-turned-preacher in Elmer Gantry or the defiant prisoner in Birdman of Alcatraz, Lancaster infused his performances with both power and nuance. These weren't just characters. They were human beings, shaped by contradictions and capable of surprising depth. But Lancaster wasn't content to remain a pawn in the Hollywood studio system. By the 1950s, he had already grown restless with the limitations imposed by the big studios. Alongside producers Harold Hecht and James Hill, he co-founded the independent production company Hecht Hill Lancaster. At a time when few actors dared to break free from the studio model, Lancaster was taking control of his own destiny. Their company produced films that were daring, socially relevant, and artistically ambitious. Works like Marty, 1955, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Separate Tables, 1958, which explored themes of loneliness and social repression. Lancaster's choices reflected not only his artistic ambition, but also his moral convictions. He was drawn to stories that resonated with the cultural upheavals of his time. The 1950s and 60s were decades of profound social change, and Lancaster's filmography mirrors that turbulence. His work consistently challenged audiences to look beyond the surface, to question authority, and to confront uncomfortable truths. Recognition came swiftly. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Elmer Gantry in 1960, where his performance as a morally ambiguous evangelist remains one of cinema's most electrifying portrayals of religious zeal and corruption. Just 2 years later, he earned further acclaim with Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962, a role that brought him both critical praise and another Oscar nomination. These achievements cemented him not only as a Hollywood icon, but also as a serious artist whose contributions transcended entertainment. Even as he aged, Lancaster refused to fade quietly into the background. In The Swimmer, 1968, he delivered a haunting performance as a man confronting the emptiness of his suburban life, a role that critics now consider one of his finest. And in Atlantic City, 1980, opposite Susan Sarandon, he offered a heartbreaking portrayal of an aging small-time gangster, clinging to the remnants of his past glory. The role earned him yet another Oscar nomination, proving that even in the twilight of his career, Lancaster's magnetism had not dimmed. If Lancaster's career was defined by bold choices and uncompromising ambition, his personal life revealed a far more complicated portrait, one marked by passion, turbulence, and the kind of restlessness that often shadows larger-than-life figures. Hollywood has always had an insatiable appetite for peering into the private lives of its stars, and in Lancaster's case, the off-screen story was nearly as fascinating as the roles he inhabited on screen. Like his career, his personal relationships were never simple, nor were they conventional. Lancaster married 3 times, and each union seemed to mirror a different stage of his evolution as a man and as an artist. His first marriage, to circus performer June Ernst, was born out of his early life in acrobatics, long before Hollywood stardom redefined him. The marriage, which lasted from the late 1930s until 1946, was passionate but volatile. Both were young, both chasing dreams in an uncertain world, and the strains of Lancaster's growing ambitions, combined with the demands of their itinerant lifestyle, proved too much. By the time the Killers launched him into superstardom, the marriage had already unraveled. For Lancaster, it was the first lesson that fame and intimacy rarely coexist easily. His second marriage, however, was far more enduring and far more public. In 1946, the same year that he broke through as a leading man, Lancaster wed Norma Anderson, a woman whose influence extended beyond Hollywood. Norma was deeply engaged in social and political causes, particularly civil rights, and played an active role with organizations like the NAACP. With her, Lancaster built a family, raising 5 children together. For more than 2 decades, they appeared to embody stability, even as his career consumed him, and his political commitments grew more outspoken. Yet behind the scenes, the marriage was increasingly strained. Lancaster's restless spirit, his frequent absences, and his complicated personality created fissures that widened over time. By 1969, after 23 years, the union collapsed in divorce. Still, Lancaster's relationship with Norma left an indelible mark. She had shared in his most formative years as an actor, through the creation of Hecht Hill Lancaster, and through his rise to international acclaim. Their marriage was not simply domestic. It was political, intellectual, and, in many ways, collaborative. Even after their separation, the echoes of their partnership remained visible in Lancaster's worldview and in the values he brought to his later projects. Lancaster's romantic life, however, was not defined solely by his marriages. Throughout the years, rumors swirled about numerous affairs and liaisons. Among the most noted was his long and complicated involvement with Jackie Bone, a hairdresser he met during the production of The Professionals. Their relationship spanned years, often described as passionate but turbulent, a push-and-pull dynamic that seemed to mirror the contradictions within Lancaster himself. It revealed a side of the actor that was intensely private, even enigmatic. A man capable of deep devotion, yet equally capable of sudden distance. By the late 1980s, as Lancaster's health began to decline following a series of heart problems, he found a final measure of peace in his 3rd marriage. In 1990, he wed Susan Martin, a woman much younger than him but whose steady presence brought calm to his final years. Unlike his previous relationships, this marriage was deliberately shielded from the public eye. There were no grand public appearances, no glamorous Hollywood stories, only the quiet companionship of 2 people bound by mutual respect. Susan remained by his side until his death in 1994, ensuring that his last chapter was marked not by loneliness, but by stability and care. What is perhaps most intriguing about Lancaster's personal life is how little he allowed it to intrude upon his public persona. Unlike many stars of his generation, he was fiercely protective of his privacy. He rarely gave interviews about his family or relationships, preferring to keep the focus on his work. To friends, he was known as loyal, sometimes difficult, often mercurial. To his children, he was both a towering figure and, at times, an elusive presence. And to the public, he remained largely inscrutable, a man whose private passions could only be guessed at through fragments of stories that leaked from the Hollywood rumor mill. This aura of mystery only deepens his legacy. Lancaster was, in many respects, a man of contradictions. Athletic yet intellectual, disciplined yet impulsive, outspoken yet guarded. His relationships reveal both his vulnerabilities and his complexities, offering glimpses of the human being behind the Hollywood icon. By the early 1990s, time had begun to catch up with Burt Lancaster, though his spirit remained as fierce as ever. Years of performing his own stunts, coupled with a life lived at full intensity, had taken a toll on his body. He had suffered a series of heart attacks, and though he fought to maintain his independence, his once vigorous presence was gradually dimming. On October 20th, 1994, Hollywood awoke to the devastating news. Burt Lancaster, one of its last true titans, had died in Los Angeles at the age of 80, following his third heart attack. The announcement sent shockwaves through the film community. For many, it felt like the closing of an era. Lancaster had not merely been an actor. He had been a force of nature, a man who embodied Hollywood's golden age while also pushing it into new and daring territory. Yet, in death, as in life, he resisted spectacle. According to his wishes, there was no formal funeral, no extravagant Hollywood send-off, no parade of celebrities in black suits for the cameras. Instead, his ashes were quietly scattered beneath a large oak tree at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles. It was a farewell that reflected the contradictions of his character, understated yet profound, modest yet unforgettable. This simplicity spoke volumes. For an actor who spent his life under glaring spotlights, Lancaster chose to exit in silence. But his absence left a void that was anything but quiet. Colleagues, critics, and fans across the world poured out tributes, each remembering not only his remarkable body of work, but also the man who had dared to live life on his own terms. What remains most striking about Lancaster's legacy is its breadth. He was not merely a star of his generation. He was a bridge between eras. From the post-war explosion of film noir in the 1940s to the socially conscious dramas of the 1950s and 60s, and finally to the more intimate, character-driven explorations of the 70s and 80s, Lancaster adapted with astonishing fluidity. Few actors could claim relevance across 4 decades, yet he did, constantly reinventing himself while remaining unmistakably Burt Lancaster. His influence extended far beyond the screen. As a producer, he had the courage to challenge the Hollywood studio system, paving the way for independent filmmaking at a time when it was still seen as risky. Marty, 1955, produced under his banner, proved that small, character-driven stories could triumph both critically and commercially, winning the Academy Award for Best Picture and inspiring a generation of filmmakers to think outside the studio mold. Equally enduring is his impact as a cultural figure. Lancaster was not afraid to use his platform for causes that mattered to him. At a time when political activism could damage a career, he spoke out against McCarthyism, championed civil rights, and vocally opposed the Vietnam War. His stances may have cost him roles, but they won him respect as a man unwilling to compromise his convictions. To this day, many actors cite him as proof that artistry and conscience can coexist in Hollywood. Yet perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Lancaster's legacy lies in the contradictions that made him so uniquely human. On screen, he was both warrior and dreamer, villain and hero, brute and poet. Off-screen, he was equally complex, charismatic but private, loyal but restless, confident yet plagued by self-doubt. These contradictions, rather than diminishing him, only deepened the allure. They made him relatable, reminding audiences that even legends are, at their core, human beings wrestling with their own demons. Films like From Here to Eternity, 1953, Elmer Gantry, 1960, The Swimmer, 1968, and Atlantic City, 1980, continue to resonate not only for their artistry, but also because Lancaster infused them with something timeless: authenticity. Watching him, one never felt the artifice of performance. Instead, audiences felt as though they were witnessing real lives unfold, with all their raw emotion and contradiction. Decades after his passing, new generations still discover Lancaster's work and marvel at its vitality. His films remain part of the canon of American cinema, studied in classrooms, revived in retrospectives, and cherished by cinephiles. More importantly, they remain alive in the public imagination, proof that true artistry does not fade with time. In the end, Burt Lancaster's death may have been quiet, but his legacy is thunderous. He left behind more than 70 films, countless unforgettable performances, and an indelible impression on both Hollywood and the audiences who adored him. His life, marked by triumphs and struggles, passion and complexity, remains a story that continues to fascinate, because it is not simply the tale of an actor, but the tale of a man who lived, loved, fought, and dared to dream on a scale as grand as the movies themselves. Beneath that oak tree in Westwood, where his ashes were scattered, lies not just the remains of a man, but the symbol of an era. Burt Lancaster was, and always will be, one of the rare figures who transcended celebrity to become a true legend. For decades, Burt Lancaster seemed to live two lives: the public man of steel who embodied Hollywood masculinity, and the private individual whose inner world remained shrouded in mystery. He guarded that boundary fiercely, preferring silence to spectacle when it came to his personal affairs. Yet, after his death in 1994, rumors began to circulate of a private notebook he had kept in his later years, an intimate record not of his professional triumphs, but of his secret affections. Whether this diary truly existed, or whether it was simply the invention of Hollywood mythmakers, will likely never be known. Still, the mere suggestion was enough to ignite fascination. Within those whispered pages were said to be names, icons in their own right, men whose public images stood in stark contrast to the lives they may have lived in private. For Lancaster, who had spent his career carefully constructing a screen persona of virile strength, these supposed confessions offered a glimpse into a vulnerability he never shared openly. One of the most startling revelations, according to the lore, was a fleeting connection with Cary Grant. Grant, himself the epitome of charm and sophistication, was rumored to have shared with Lancaster a short-lived but intensely private romance. Their alleged bond, delicate and cautious, reflected the times. Two powerful men navigating feelings that society demanded they suppress. If true, it was less about scandal than about the quiet recognition of kindred spirits in a world hostile to authenticity. Even more sensational was the mention of J. Edgar Hoover, the formidable FBI director whose own private life has long been the subject of speculation. The story painted their relationship not as romantic in the traditional sense, but as a strange intersection of intimacy and power, a mirror of Hollywood itself, where desire was entangled with secrecy, influence, and fear. It suggested that Lancaster's world was far more entangled with the machinery of authority than his films ever revealed. Perhaps the most poignant name linked to Lancaster's alleged notes was Rock Hudson. Hudson, like Lancaster, bore the burden of projecting hypermasculinity on screen while hiding a more complicated truth off camera. The whispers claimed their connection was deeper than physical attraction. It was a friendship turned romance, built on empathy for each other's hidden battles. In an era when disclosure could mean the end of a career, their supposed bond became an emblem of shared resilience. There were also mentions of Ricky Nelson, the golden boy of early rock and roll and television fame. In Lancaster's supposed account, their connection was brief but tinged with mentorship. He cast himself as protector, guiding Nelson through the treacherous waters of fame and shielding him, if only briefly, from the predators of the industry. Whether fact or fiction, the story added another layer to Lancaster's enigmatic role as both lover and guardian. The most volatile tale of all centered on Marlon Brando, Hollywood's great rebel. According to the stories, Lancaster described their relationship as explosive, chaotic, and impossibly magnetic. Two men defined by their intensity, colliding with both passion and fury, never able to tame each other but unable to fully let go. If Brando represented the raw, untamed spirit of post-war cinema, then Lancaster was his mirror, disciplined yet equally untamed at heart. Their alleged connection symbolized the restless fire that burned within both men, often destructive, always unforgettable. Of course, skeptics argue these stories are nothing more than retroactive myths, woven from fragments of gossip and the audience's desire to imagine a hidden Hollywood. And yet, even if the diary never existed, the fascination it inspires speaks to something very real. The loneliness, secrecy, and yearning that defined so many lives in mid-20th century America. For stars like Lancaster, whose very livelihood depended on maintaining an image of conventional masculinity, love itself became a dangerous balancing act. Whether imagined or authentic, the tales attributed to Lancaster's private writings invite us to reconsider the man we thought we knew. They remind us that behind every myth lies a human being, grappling with longing, identity, and the relentless pressure of public scrutiny. More than anything, they show us that Lancaster's legend was not built solely on the films he left behind, but also on the mysteries he carried to his grave. Mysteries that, decades later, continue to intrigue, seduce, and challenge the way we understand the icons of Hollywood's golden age. Burt Lancaster's life, when viewed in its entirety, reads almost like a script Hollywood itself could never have written. He began as a boy from East Harlem who dreamed of the trapeze, transformed into a matinee idol whose piercing blue eyes and commanding presence defined an era, and eventually emerged as a symbol of both strength and contradiction. His career sparkled with Academy Awards and unforgettable performances, yet his personal life was a labyrinth of passions, secrets, and unspoken truths. The whispered romances, the rumored diary, and the shadowed relationships we explored are more than tantalizing anecdotes. They represent the hidden struggles of an entire generation of stars, men and women who lived under the relentless glare of Hollywood's spotlight while carrying private burdens no audience ever saw. In Lancaster's case, these stories challenged the simplistic image of the iron-jawed leading man, offering instead a portrait of a human being both vulnerable and complex. His secrets, whether real or imagined, remind us that beneath the myth of the movie star lies the same longing, fear, and need for connection that define us all. To revisit Lancaster's legacy is also to look back at Hollywood itself. The film industry of his time was both a dream factory and a prison, a place where artistry thrived but individuality was often suppressed. Power brokers demanded conformity, the press enforced silence, and reputations were built on illusions. Yet, hidden beneath the gloss, there were always private stories of defiance, of love that dared not speak its name, of identities carefully concealed. Lancaster's journey, with all its triumphs and shadows, becomes a mirror for that world. A world where brilliance and secrecy coexisted in uneasy balance. And so, when we speak of Burt Lancaster today, we are not simply honoring a star of the past. We are acknowledging a man whose life continues to speak across generations. His courage as an actor, his convictions as a citizen, and his mysteries as a private individual ensure that his legacy endures, not as a relic of Hollywood's golden age, but as a reminder that every legend carries untold stories. If these glimpses into Lancaster's hidden world have captivated you, imagine how many more secrets remain locked away in Hollywood's archives, whispered only in diaries, letters, and private recollections. The silver screen gave us heroes, villains, and dreamers. But behind it stood real people, each with a truth waiting to be uncovered. That is the journey we invite you to continue with us. Here, on this channel, we go beyond the spotlight to uncover the shadows, the mysteries, and the humanity of cinema's greatest icons. So, if you want to keep exploring the untold stories of Hollywood's most fascinating legends, stories of ambition, heartbreak, secrecy, and survival, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us as we peel back the curtain on the myths of the silver screen. Because the past still has secrets to share, and together, we can bring them back into the light.